Imagine a man marked by a past of privilege and by a crime. A prince of the most powerful empire of his time, raised in Egyptian luxury, yet with Hebrew blood running through his veins. A fugitive. A man who fled into the desert not only to escape justice, but also to escape himself. But in the midst of scorching solitude, something happened. A bush was on fire, yet it was not consumed. And from within that flame, a voice called his name. Moses, the murderer, the runaway, the exile. Now he was the chosen one, the mouthpiece of God, the leader of a divine revolution. What could drive a broken man to stand against pharaohs and free an enslaved nation? What sacred fire burns without being extinguished, leading a people through deadly deserts toward the promise of life? Get ready to meet the deliverer of Israel, the man who spoke face to face with God. And before we go any further, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like so you don't miss any of our soul-stirring Bible stories. Moses was living a peaceful season, far from the noise of Egypt's palaces. He had left his old life behind and was now shepherding flocks in the land of Midian, under the protection of his father-in-law Jethro. Day after day he crossed the arid desert, guiding sheep beneath the blazing sun, surrounded by silence and calm. The once hostile landscape had become a refuge where Moses found peace. But one day the monotony was shattered. In the distance, his eyes caught a strange glow. A bush was burning, but the flames didn't consume it. Heat danced among its branches, illuminating the surroundings, and yet the shrub remained untouched. Drawn by the mystery, Moses approached, step by step, until he stood before the fire. Then, in the midst of absolute silence, a voice called out, "Moses, Moses." The echo of those words thundered in his soul. Startled, he looked around. There was no one, just him and the voice. A voice that didn't come from the earth, but from heaven. It was God. That moment marked the beginning of a transformation that would change his destiny, and the destiny of an entire people. The creator of the universe entrusted him with an impossible mission, to free the Hebrews from Egyptian oppression. And in Moses' heart, the first battle arose, doubt. Me? How could a mere shepherd stand against Pharaoh? Moses stood still, as if time itself had frozen in that very instant. God's words kept echoing inside him like distant thunder, powerful, inescapable. Deliver the Hebrew people? The weight of that mission hit him like a relentless wave. How could a simple shepherd stand against an empire? The desert had shaped his life with simple routines, with only the whisper of the wind for company. But now, that calm was vanishing in the face of a divine calling. Moses felt doubt settle in his chest like a heavy stone. "Who am I to do this?" he whispered, not realizing he'd spoken aloud. In his mind, the image formed. Himself, alone, with nothing but a worn staff in hand, standing before the throne of the most powerful man in the world. He knew Egypt's wealth. He had seen Pharaoh's arrogance with his own eyes. That ruler bowed to no one. The idea of convincing him seemed absurd. As his thoughts drowned in insecurity, the voice spoke again. The same voice, firm yet patient. It was God. He promised Moses he would not be alone. That every step, every word, would be accompanied by his presence. Moses listened, but fear still beat loudly in his heart. Will it be enough? His humility blinded him. He couldn't see what God had already seen from the beginning. Moses wasn't a warrior. He wasn't eloquent or powerful. And even though heaven had called him, he still doubted. How could he prove to others that his mission was real? That's when God interrupted him again, this time with a simple, almost puzzling question. "What is that in your hand?" Moses looked down. There was his staff. That simple, weathered rod that had accompanied him through countless journeys across the desert. "A staff," he replied. Then God gave him a clear command, "Throw it to the ground." With some hesitation, Moses obeyed. The moment the staff touched the dry earth, the miracle happened. In seconds, the lifeless wood turned into a living serpent, writhing swiftly across the dusty ground. Moses jumped back, eyes wide, heart pounding in his chest. Fear froze him in place. Was he really seeing what he thought he was seeing? The snake slithered between the desert rocks with hypnotic motion. It all felt so unreal, so otherworldly. But then God's voice rang out again, clear and resolute. "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." Moses hesitated. Take it by the tail? He knew that was the most dangerous end. Even so, he took a deep breath, steadied his fear, and obeyed. His trembling hand reached toward the creature, and the moment his fingers touched the serpent, it transformed once again into his familiar staff. Just a simple piece of wood, now turned into a divine sign. The same tool he once used to guide sheep was now a symbol of God's power. But there was no time to linger in awe. The real challenge was still ahead. Back in Egypt, Moses reunited with Aaron, his brother, who would stand by his side on this sacred mission. Together they walked with purpose toward Pharaoh's palace, a towering structure filled with columns and guards, radiating authority and pride. Moses, with his staff in hand and conviction in his heart, crossed the gates of power. He knew he wasn't just facing a man, he was confronting an entire empire built on oppression. Before the throne, the grandeur of the Egyptian palace only highlighted the simplicity of God's chosen messenger. But it was there, amid splendor and arrogance, that Moses spoke the words that would shake history, "Let my people go." The echo rippled through the hall like a wave. Pharaoh, unmoved, stared back with disdain, and laughed. A dry, scornful, arrogant laugh. Who was this shepherd to make demands? His answer was sharp and final. No. Pharaoh's heart was as hard as stone, and he had no intention of freeing the Hebrews. Moses knew then, the real battle was just beginning. God had already warned him. Pharaoh's heart would be hardened. This wouldn't be a contest of words. It would be a direct confrontation between heaven's will and human pride. The staff Moses held wasn't just a symbol, it was a sign of what was to come. Before Pharaoh, Moses threw his staff to the ground once more, and again it became a living serpent. The atmosphere grew tense. Pharaoh, keeping his composure, summoned his magicians. They too turned their staffs into serpents. But then something unexpected happened. Moses' serpent devoured all the others. A simple act, but one that revealed everything. God's power had no equal. And still, Pharaoh's heart remained unmoved. Not a single crack in his arrogance. Moses' words, so firm and full of authority, weren't enough to shatter the king's pride. Then heaven responded. Guided by the divine voice, Moses knew the time for warnings was over. Egypt was about to witness what it had never seen before. With his staff raised high, Moses stood before the majestic Nile. That river, source of life and prosperity, was about to become a symbol of divine judgment. When his staff touched the water, change was immediate. The river turned thick, dark, red as blood. A foul stench filled the air. Fish floated lifeless on the surface. The pride of nation become an open wound. Chaos spread quickly. Families, desperate for something to drink, found only contamination. Para ori mandum moved. Toim, it was just another trick. His magicians mimicked the transformation, but the damage was already done. And then, like a rising tide, came the plagues. First, the frogs. They sailed from the riverine waves, covering fields, temples, even beds. There was no escaping them. When at last they vanished, swarms of gnats followed, buzzing endlessly, biting relentlessly. Then came the flies, infesting all of Egypt with their disgusting presence, turning every corner into a living nightmare. The message was clear, God would not be ignored. Each new plague was like a hammer striking the heart of the empire. A relentless reminder that divine power could not be matched. Still, Pharaoh stood firm, like a boulder in the middle of a storm. Egypt sank deeper into chaos. The plagues fell like an unending cascade, each one stronger, more destructive. It was as if heaven itself had turned against the earth. Every refusal from Pharaoh brought a new calamity. The suffering of the people grew unbearable, but the Kinseat remained stopped. Close, death, bleed. But the final plague would be unlike any before. Moses knew it. God had prepared him for this moment. It was the climax of everything. A night that would be remembered forever, Passover. The instructions were clear. Each Hebrew family was to choose a spotless lamb, sacrifice it, and mark the doorposts of their homes with its blood. As it, a warning. As chill. The air grew tense. The silence became heavy, almost suffocating. The sky, cold and clear, seemed to watch in stillness, as if even the stars understood the weight of that night. And then, it happened. In the early hours of the morning, a cry broke the silence. A scream of anguish echoed across Egypt. From the gilded halls of the palace to the humblest of homes, everyone felt the same blow, the death of the firstborns. The pain made no distinction. Judgment had been absolute. Pharaoh, who until then stood proud and defiant, was now broken. His gaze empty. His voice chattered. At last, examined Moses. There were no words left, only a command drenched in defeat: go. Take your people and leave. And so, in the dead of night, the Hebrew people began to move. Entire families prepared in haste. They gathered their belongings, lifted their children, and looked to the horizon. This wasn't just an escape, it was the birth of a new story. They were living in slavery, suffering, the past, and walking toward freedom. Egypt, the land of chance and cruel decrees, was now being them. The place that had imprisoned them for generations became nothing more than a shadow on the horizon. The Hebrew people marched forward, hearts full of hope and feet heavy with uncertainty. Moses led them step by step, guided by an unwavering fight. Freedom, newly tasted, was sweet, but also unsettled. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast, silent, and scorching. Fatigue and fear began to crack the resolve of many. What lies ahead? Where is this promised land? Still, the multitude pressed on, until a new threat rose behind them. Pharaoh, devastated by his loss, consumed by pride, changed his mind. He could not allow the Hebrews to live without paying for what they saw as humiliation. The roar of Egyptian war chariots soon filled the air. The army advanced in full formation, spears rushed, horses galloping, pursuing them with fury. The Hebrews, slowing their progress, felt danger closing in. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Murmurs of fear turned into cries of panic. Ahead of them, the vast Red Sea. They, an army burning for revenge. There was no escape. Terror exploded through the crowd. Voices rose against Moses. Was it for this you brought us out of Egypt? Told you like trapped animals? But Moses did not yield to fear. He lifted his eyes to heaven. Deep within, he knew, without a shred of doubt, that God had not led them this far to abandon them. With steady steps, he walked to the edge of the sea. The wind howled. The waves crashed violently. Then, in an act of absolute fight, Moses raised his staff. And then, the impossible happened. The waters began to part, pushed aside as if by an invisible hand. A path emerged in the middle of the sea. Dry ground stretched out before them, flanked by towering walls of water. The miracle had begun. The waves rose like liquid cliffs, forming a corridor through the heart of the sea. The wind howled, as if summoned from heaven itself, driving the waters apart. What had once been an impassable barrier was now a gateway to the unknown. The Hebrews stood in awe, mouths agape, eyes wide with disbelief. Before them lay a passage carved through chaos, a clear and undeniable sign of divine intervention. But there was no time to stand and marvel. Moses stepped forward with steady pace and fierce resolve, leading his people onward. Every step on the seabed, once drowned and forgotten, was a step into freedom, a step into destiny. Their hearts pounded with a mix of fear and hope, pushing them forward. The roar of the wind and the crashing of the waves above created an eerie symphony. The sea, restrained and towering, seemed to watch in silence, like a hand waiting to be unleashed. The Hebrews moved as fast as they could, but danger still loomed behind them. The Egyptians were not far behind. Fueled by rage and led by a vengeful Pharaoh, the chariots surged forward, following the very path Moses had opened. The thunder of wheels and the pounding of oars echoed across the corridor like a dead drum. Moses glanced back. Tension crackled through the people like a storm ready to break. Fear clung to every face. Would they be caught before they reached the other side? Still, Moses pressed on, unshaken. And with a wavering fight that the same hand that opened the sea would now shield them from harm. Finally, the last Hebrew stepped onto the far shore. With eyes locked on the horizon and a fear burning in his soul, Moses raised his staff one final time. In that instant, the sea began to collapse. The deafening roar of water reclaiming its place filled the air. The last of Pharaoh's chariots and horses were swallowed by the crashing waves. The fury of the sea closed in with unstoppable force. The pursuit was over. The people stood in silence, eyes fixed on the sea behind them. The waters that had protected them now closed once more, swallowing the threat of Egypt in their depths. For the first time, Israel was truly free. But freedom came at a cost, the wilderness. The vastness of the landscape stretched endlessly before them. The scorching sun blasted overhead, and the dry, biting air began to wear down their spirits. The euphoria of victory slowly faded, replaced by a creeping sense of uncertainty. The freedom they had longed for was now starting to feel like a burden. Each day under the relentless and was a new trial. Exhaustion gripped their bodies, and soon hunger and thirst became their fiercest enemies. The desert, 11 sinas de path to a new beginning, now revealed itself as an unforgiving adversary. Whispers of discontent began to rise among the people. Was this truly worth it? Had they escaped Egypt only to die here, lost, starving, and parched under a merciless sky? Moses, carrying the weight of leadership on his shoulders, understood that the journey had only just begun. Egypt was behind them, but the promised land was still far ahead. And between them lay a road of tests and trials, each one a crucible for their faith. The people, weary and uncertain, began to doubt. Eyes turned to Moses with suspicion. Had they been freed just to meet death in the sand? But Moses didn't falter. Deep in his soul he believed. They had to trust in God. Then one morning something unexpected happened. As the people emerged from their tents, they found the ground blanketed with something white and fine, something they had never seen before. Confusion spread quickly. "What is this?" they asked each other in hushed voices. Moses, calm and sure, stood before them. "This is manna," he told them. "The bread that God has sent from heaven to sustain us. Each family is to gather only what they need for the day. Nothing more. Tomorrow God will provide again." And so, each day, manna fell from the sky like a divine promise. A reminder that God was with them, guiding, sustaining, watching over every step. But the desert was not done testing them. Though the manna fed their bellies, thirst soon became their new tormentor. As they pressed deeper into the barren land, the sun bore down harder. Every drop of sweat felt like a weight dragging them down. Water was scarce. The whispers that once rose from hunger now turned into cries for water. A new and urgent threat that loomed over the wandering nation. Hope began to fade among the people. Complaints multiplied and uncertainty took root in their hearts. The blazing sun and endless days of wandering made them wonder if God had delivered them only to let them die of hunger and thirst. Some, driven by desperation, began to long for the days of slavery in Egypt. Days when, despite the chains, they at least had food and water. The struggle to survive in the wilderness made even those dark days seem almost desirable. Moses could feel the pressure mounting. He heard the growing discontent, saw the frustration etched into every tired face. The burden of leading through such adversity weighed heavily on him. Desperate, he turned once more to God, seeking help. And God, in his infinite wisdom, gave him a new command. Moses was to take his staff, the same one that had parted the Red Sea, and strike a rock. In front of the doubting Israelites, he was to hit it with his rod, and from it, water would flow. With unwavering resolve, Moses obeyed. Surrounded by the people, he raised his staff high. With a powerful motion, he struck the rock. The sharp crack echoed across the dry landscape, and then, miraculously, water gushed out from the stone. Cool, clear, abundant water. The people rushed forward, filling their hands, jars, and mouths. Relief and wonder spread across the crowd. Water, pouring from such an unlikely source, was a vivid reminder. Even in the heart of the desert, God had not abandoned them. Still, even after all they had seen, miracles, deliverance, provision, the people of Israel did not fully grasp what it meant to be chosen. Moses understood that what they needed wasn't just food and water. They needed purpose, direction, a covenant. And that's when something extraordinary was about to happen. At the foot of a towering mountain, Mount Sinai, the people camped, unaware of the divine encounter that awaited them. The mountain loomed ahead, majestic and ominous, wrapped in heavy clouds. The sky darkened, thunder roared, and lightning split the heavens, as if creation itself was preparing to witness something sacred. God called Moses to ascend the mountain, to receive a revelation that would not only shape this wandering nation, but would echo through time and generations to come. As Moses climbed higher, the people watched from below, overwhelmed by fear and awe. They knew something divine was unfolding before them, though they could not grasp the magnitude of what was about to happen. Alone, Moses ascended the mountain, vanishing into the thick, dark clouds as thunder cracked and fire blazed at the summit. It was there, in the heart of that divine storm, that God gave him the stone tablets, the 10 Commandments. These were no ordinary rules. They were a sacred covenant between the Almighty and his people, etched by the very finger of God. Each commandment was more than moral instruction. It was a blueprint for building a community, a nation rising from the ashes of slavery and sorrow. Each word carried divine weight, bridging the gap between the human and the holy. They weren't just about surviving, they were about becoming. About living with purpose, in spiritual freedom, in harmony with God and with each other. When Moses finally descended from the mountain, the stone tablets clutched tightly in his hands, he wasn't just carrying laws, he was bearing the future of Israel. But what he found at the foot of the mountain shattered his heart. There, in full view, the people of Israel had fallen into disobedience. They had fashioned a golden calf and were worshipping it, forgetting the miracles they had witnessed. The plagues, the sea, the manna. The sacred covenant had barely been given, and already it was broken. The weight on Moses' shoulders grew heavier. He now knew that the journey to the promised land would not just be through wilderness and time, it would be a journey of the soul, a path of transformation, of learning to trust, to believe, to obey. Still Moses pressed on. Despite betrayal, despite rebellion, he continued to lead. With faith rooted in the calling he received before the burning bush, he guided the people across the vast and unforgiving desert. Time and time again he turned to God, for strength, for wisdom, for mercy. Even with the holy tablets in his grasp, the hearts of the people wavered. They had seen seas part, water spring from rocks, and bread fall from the heavens. Yet doubt still clung to them like a shadow. With patience that defied human limits, Moses pleaded with God on their behalf, even when they turned against him. He understood that his mission was not only to take them to a physical land, but to shape them into a people who truly knew their God and followed him with all their hearts. In guiding them, Moses too was being shaped. In every trial, every moment of despair, he was learning the deepest lessons of faith, humility, and leadership. Moses learned that being a leader chosen by God didn't mean having all the answers. It meant trusting in something far greater than himself. And yet, Moses would never set foot in the promised land. From the peak of Mount Nebo, Moses gazed out at the distant land, a vision of the fulfillment of God's promise. But he knew that his journey had come to an end. The leader who had guided the people with unwavering faith, who had endured trials and tribulations, now had to pass the torch. Moses would not walk the land that had been promised to the descendants of Abraham, but he had fulfilled the most crucial mission of all, preparing the people to receive it. His life, marked by miracles and sacrifices, left an eternal lesson for humanity. The story of Moses is rich with teachings about faith, leadership, and trust in the divine plan. First and foremost, we learn that God often chooses those who feel incapable of carrying out great missions. Moses, a man who saw himself as insufficient, struggling with public speaking and filled with doubts, was chosen by God to free an entire nation. His story reminds us that true strength is not found in our human abilities, but in the power of God working through us. Another key lesson is Moses' humility. Despite having witnessed miracles performed through his hands, he never exalted himself. He always recognized that he was merely an instrument in God's hands. Moses maintained a humble heart, willing to serve, intercede, and lead, even in the face of constant complaints and rebellions from the people. His leadership teaches us that being a leader is not about giving orders, but about being patient, compassionate, and faithful, even when the road gets dark and difficult. Finally, Moses' journey speaks of perseverance. Though he never set foot in the promised land, he completed his mission with faith until the very end. Sometimes we may not see the immediate fruits of our labor, but that doesn't lessen the importance of what we've done. The true reward lies in fulfilling the purpose for which we were called, trusting that God will finish what he began in us. If Moses' story has inspired you and you want to discover more stories of faith and triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with your loved ones, and of course subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.